The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Best Practices for Laserfiche Project Communications. I am Kimberly Samuelson, and today I will be your moderator and one of your speakers. Today's agenda, we'll breeze through the introduction. We'll talk about best practices in communications and give you some tips from the software marketing world. Then we'll go into the part of the presentation you're probably most interested in, Tony from Yorba Linda Water District. And that's it. I just wanted to give a brief bio of Tony. He is the Records Management Administrator for Yorba Linda Water District. He has just under 2 decades of experience in envisioning, delivering, and managing records management programs for all sorts of public entities. And he also has certifications in information governance and records management. So I generally like to start presentations with a definition so we can all kind of agree what the framework moving forward is. So what is project communications management? It is a framework and process needed to provide the development, disbursement, storage, retrieval, and final disposition of project information. The key elements are what, whom, how often, and when. And I just want to draw back to your attention, those of you who are records managers will see some familiar terms regarding managing the information flow of the communications management is very similar to records management. And those of you who have taken a journalism class or even just thesis writing will understand that the key elements are always, who, what, when, where, why. And we'll dig into that a little deeper. And finally, the statistic that I have put up is probably the entire reason for creating this webinar. And I found this a little surprising, that 80% of a project manager's time, and this is a technology project manager, is spent working on communications. 80%. So they really become the hub of the wheel in terms of communications around your entire project. So we created this to give you some tips and hopefully you'll be successful at it. And I just did want to add that 50% of the time that the project manager spends communicating is actually within their own project team. Versus outside the project team, which we'll talk a little bit about more when we go into working on feedback. So I really see the project manager sitting at the intersection. So we look at kind of the illustration, and it's in some ways an overzealous Venn diagram. And it is the project manager who sits at the intersection of knowing how to manage a project, knowing how to manage change, and then knowing how to manage communications. So all tech projects that support organizational business activities tend to have many participants. And Laserfiche projects is a good example of that. They tend to have many, I think, because the software has so many features and functions that can help all sorts of departments. You're going to have stakeholders, management, internal and external business clients, residents if you're in the public sector, and IT. Also heads of business units like accounting, your reseller if you're using a reseller, and possibly Laserfiche itself. So there's a big team of people you're going to need to communicate with. And I would say, number one, make a list. So some communications serve as translations. And at one point in my career, I used to refer to myself as the universal conduit for translating records management speak and IT speak. For instance, the founder and CEO of Laserfiche, Nailing Wacker, once used to do a presentation called Records Managements Are from Venus and IT People Are from Mars. Now, obviously, it was kind of a spoof on the popular, those of you remember before the change of the century, there were a lot of Venus Mars books, men and women, how they communicate differently. But I think that especially back then, records managers and IT people had the same goals, but they were speaking about it differently and heading in that direction differently. And that would cause some issue in terms of communications. I think today is better though. And then one other tip, what we call projects matters. And you don't think of it that way, but they really do. So here are some names that people have called their Laserfiche system. The agency's Laserfiche system, the city of, blank's Laserfiche system, Laserfiche's cloud system, the Laserfiche implementation or deployment, the clerk's system. Laserfiche was known as the clerk's software for decades. The records management software, the IT department's ECM platform, and the trusted system. So because it's called so many different things, think about who you're speaking to, what message you're trying to send, and what you call the system, because it will matter. So some kind of high-level advice. The sender. You have to talk about sender and receiver when you're talking about communications, right? The 2 points. So the sender is often the initiator of the communications, could be, but might not be the project manager. For instance, I know project managers who tell me, I'm not great at writing. So I've partnered with somebody in the PR department, or I've partnered with this person because they're really great at writing our newsletter. So if you have those needs, look for a partner. I think it'll be easier to find one than you think. Receivers are the people that receive the communications. They're often, stakeholders, management, internal and external business clients, residents, IT, the heads of business units. That whole list we just rattled through about a minute and a half ago, they're also receivers of communication. So then I want to give you my first tip from the world of marketing, and that is something called persona building. So a persona is, a stereotype, an archetype that is developed to understand how your project affects that role, and hence how to communicate with them and jolly them along so they'll work with you. So here's an example. Persona development has a long history in the world of marketing, but there is a practice called pragmatic marketing, and it actually comes out of pragmatic project management, and you can look those up. It's actually a real company. So what you're determining is, what are their problems? What do they want? How do they want to know about your Laserfiche project? How can you get them on board? How can you get them to the point where they're contributing to the project? So here's an example. Tom. Tom is the accounting manager. He is critical for Laserfiche support because he has a supporting role of helping with the financial rollout. He's not a talker, but he's great on email. He especially likes Teams Messenger. He also likes Star Wars and puppies. I put that in as a funny, but I have also written project communications that spoofed a role of a movie, and it was a lot of fun, and people took it really well. So the point is, how can Laserfiche help him? And that's where we talk about something called a marketecture. And a marketecture is where you align features and functionalities with client needs. And it's something that's probably best done in the form of a spreadsheet. So Tom, all of Tom's characteristics, which I showed you on the previous slide, and then features and functions of the upcoming rollout that you envision will be to Tom's advantage and what he needs to know about. And then finally, you need a feedback mechanism. And, feedback mechanism comes out of good project management, ITIL, Six Sigma, Lean, Agile. Feedback is critical. Iterating on feedback is critical. So always ask for feedback. But remember, just because you ask for feedback and you take it, meaning you write it down, so to speak, it doesn't mean you have to use it. People very much appreciate knowing that their feedback is listened to. So practice active listening, but you don't necessarily have to use it. And that will bring me to my next point, which is be generous with credit. Make sure the organization knows how this person helped you, because when you do that, they will be apt to help you more. And surprisingly, even though they suggested something that maybe wasn't what you were thinking, it's astonishing how quickly people will pick up the ability to say, yeah, I did that too, and help you when that is made public. And then finally, understand that don't be too proud to take a good idea. Good ideas, you never know where they're going to come from. I used to do some sort of informal testing on marketing projects, and besides a standardized A/B testing, which is way deeper than I want to go into, I would kind of go around and show people subject lines and say, which email would you open and why? And I found a person who is actually an assistant to our CEO and has no marketing training whatsoever. But she had the most astonishingly powerful ability to look at a subject line and go, yeah, I'd pick that one and I'd run that one, and it would have this amazing click-through rate. So another thing I'd want to add is, be aware of your mediums. So not only do you have to think about the sender and the receiver and who the receiver are, you have to think about how they want to receive information, email, newsletter, Teams, verbal, written, informal, meetings. So know your organization's tone and channels. And I think that's best learned by observation and frankly, maybe making a few mistakes. But, everybody makes mistakes when they start out a new project. And then there's, stylistic issues like, how do I communicate horizontally across an organization versus vertically meaning to your stakeholders or to management? How do I do the drop by? A drop by is informal communications. For instance, hey, just installed this records management, blah, blah, blah. Let me show you how it works, and it'll help you do X, Y, and Z. That would be an example of informal. Formal would be like, a training, a more formalized looking email, like an announcement, for instance. So there are plenty of communications templates online, and I was going to do my own, but honestly, the ones I found online, you just Google, are actually pretty good and useful. And I don't know that they need to be as complicated as some that I've seen. So, who are your stakeholders? Figure out your stakeholders. What are their expectations? Again, that goes back to persona building and architecture. What communications will satisfy their expectations? How do you tell them what they need to hear in a way that they'll want to hear it? How often do you tell them? If you send an email every day, nobody's going to read it. If you send maybe a bi-weekly update or a monthly update, people will read it. But you need to think about, you want to keep your project in front of people, but you don't want to make them sick of hearing about it. And the medium we talked about, it could be just an email announcement. You could have an internal newsletter that you use. Most organizations have plenty of channels to easily suss out a correct medium. And then, what is the actual message to those people? So much like a project plan, the comms plan is really a multi-stage exercise. So you want to figure out, your preparation, your vision, your implementation. You want how to embed the plan in the practice of your project, and perhaps even further. Like, a lot of IT projects are done, but they're not really done because you're still working through using the actual software. So it's good for people to see updates and for them to be able to appreciate all the effort and energy that's going into it, and then be able to use the particular implementation, which should be your ultimate goal. And then again, always keeping a feedback channel open. I mean, obviously, when you're mid-project, you're taking a lot of feedback and iterating on it. When you're done, you're probably doing less of that, but it still doesn't hurt to take it. Which brings me to everybody's favorite practice, change management. As humans, we don't like change. We just don't. Change management is the controlled identification and implementation of required changes within a computer system, or at least that's the definition we're going to use. So there's two books I'd like to suggest regarding change management. One is Malcolm Gladwell. A lot of people have already read this, called The Tipping Point. And he published this, I think, 2003, but I could be wrong. And there's a couple points from that book that I've used to implement Laserfiche projects or communicate about Laserfiche projects. And the one that really stood out to me was something called the Law of the Few. And the Law of the Few says, well, not a lot of people are actually necessary to grow communications regarding a Laserfiche project. But here are the 3 types of people you should look for to help you. Now, ideally, you'd have all 3 of these people within an organization, or maybe you're one of them, or heck, maybe you're 2 of them. But I just want to run through and define them because I think it's interesting. So, connectors. What are connectors? Connectors are the people in a community who know a large number of employees. They have a relationship with them and are in the habit of making introductions. A connector is essentially the social equivalent of a computer network hub. Now, I think we can all sit back and think about our organizational chart and think, oh yeah, this person's a connector, or hey, I'm a connector. Connectors are very valuable. The next person you're looking for is a maven, and frequently this is the project manager. Mavens are information specialists, or people we rely upon to connect us with new information. They accumulate knowledge, especially about, the things going on around them, and then they know how to share it in a way that is easy for people to digest. So mavens are very useful in terms of communication because they somehow intuitively figure out, okay, that person has this personality type. This is how they like to receive information. This is what I can give them to get them to be positive about my project. Let's go. And then finally, you have what I call salespeople. And some people in organizations have real salespeople, and some people have people who enjoy persuading, who are charismatic, and have powerful negotiation skills. They have this kind of indefinable something that goes beyond what they say, which makes others kind of agree with them. There's kind of that charm, so to speak, like, oh yeah, Bill said this and I agree, or he had a good point. And salespeople are invaluable in terms of selling a Laserfiche deployment internally, as are connectors and mavens. So at a minimum, it's probably necessary to have 2 of them. Ideally, you'd have all 3. We'll move to our next book, which is specifically about change management, called Switch: How to Change When Change is Hard. This was written by two academics in anthropology and sociology. They're brothers, Chip and Dan Heath. And essentially, their theory is that when you want people to change what they're doing, you need to tell them stories about how either another organization like your organization has made a change, another role, another department. And that, the shorthand for that is stories are sticky. Ever since we were all in caves, we told stories around the fire. We drew stories on the cave wall. Stories resonate with us as humans, and they're an excellent way to approach change management. So if we take that sort of drawing on the cave wall and translate that forward, what does that look like? Well, it might look like a demo. So you want Sally to want to use Laserfiche for her contract management, maybe get with CPS or Laserfiche and ask them if they have a contract management demo that you can show her. Because if she can see how her work process is assisted or solved, if it's a major problem, using the product in a demo, that will resonate with her, that will be sticky with her. Another way to get a story is, find another CPS client or another Laserfiche client and call them and ask them, or go visit them, because nothing like seeing it right in front of them on somebody's desktop will change somebody's mind about an IT project like seeing it work right in front of them. So with that being said, I would like to introduce Tony from Yorba Linda Water District. Welcome, Tony, and we're ready to start when you are.
Okay, thanks, Kimberly. That was great stuff. I think I'll start off with just saying that my portion of the presentation is very much going to parallel Kimberly's, but it's going to be really from the perspective of a records management and a records manager in a small to mid-sized organization. That's my experience base. So that's kind of going to be the angle we're coming from, and how, from the records perspective, we try and guide staff through records management implementation and digital transformation. And I believe because you're still communicating with humans, most of this can scale up to larger organizations, but I'm coming from the corner of the universe of small to mid-level organizations, mostly public. And I think that what I'm going to present really benefits people in records roles, also people who supervise records roles, because I found that a lot of supervisors of records management don't have a clear grasp or understanding of records management, and I hope to provide some insight as to what I think you should expect from your records management program, or some cues to maybe improve the program. So let's get into it. So first of all, I'd like to talk about what you want to communicate from your records management program and trying to foment digital transformation. I think you really need to acknowledge that records management, you're generally not a revenue generating department, so you have to embrace and understand your service role. If you really want a successful program, you have to make that a huge priority, almost equal to your compliance responsibility, because that's going to be the only way that you grow your program and get people on board. So you want to do that by communicating a culture of service. You want to communicate solutions and resolutions to things, especially that you're approached about. You need to communicate, especially early on in your program while you're building it. You have to communicate competence and reliability. You have to communicate what's possible and what's been accomplished, those stories that Kimberly alludes to. You really have to reduce people's anxiety, and that's where the change management communications comes in. That's how you reduce anxiety while you're guiding people through these new processes. You want to be very careful of your language. Just because you know all these fancy records management terms and so forth, other non-records related staff, they don't want to hear that, and sometimes it can come off as aloof or imposing. So you really want to minimize that type of stuff. Two last key factors. You always want to communicate to business units that they own the records that they work with and that they generate, and that records management are merely the caretakers. You have to be clear about that relationship. That's a huge thing in building trust and reducing anxiety. You've got to reinforce that and demonstrate that. So what I will say in the context of Laserfiche, you're trying to create a centralized records management program. You're trying to push digital transformation outwardly to make people's lives easier or their work easier. Inwardly, you're trying to get information governance controls that are achieved by automating these processes and instituting Laserfiche in many aspects of how they do their work and how they manage their records. So if you use Laserfiche in forms and workflow, and you partner with your great VAR and use that support that you're paying for, it can be the most valuable tools and weapons to get these successes, to digitally transform, to provide people with solutions, and to create a successful program where you have even more information governance controls. All right, next slide. So explicit communication. You want to make sure that when you're communicating with staff, you're communicating, as Kimberly alluded to, horizontally. You want to talk at their level. You don't want to talk down to them. And if possible, you want to be positive. You want to keep talking about what you can do. And if possible, if you can appropriately and accurately do so, refer to and use the language that they're using or their nomenclature that they use. That will familiarize them and it will make them more comfortable. And you want to tell them, like, hey, especially early on in a program, we can locate that information. It is. We can take that off your hands. We can scan all of that backlog for you and make it accessible on web links so you don't have to deal with the paper again. We can automate that process for you. Just a lot of we can, demonstrating what the possibilities are. And you want to avoid the vertical language. You don't want to talk down and come across as aloof. The vertical language is for communicating upward to the executive tier when you're looking for buy-in or reporting.
Tony, if I could add to that,
Absolutely.
I think the we can phrasing is excellent. And I would add to that using the yes and. So yes and is a response that is the reverse of no but. No but is a negation of an idea. So I want to do this. And then the project manager says, no, but this. Yes, and isn't that different? It actually comes out of the world of improv. So yes, meaning, yes, I hear you. Yes, I acknowledge you have a concern. And here is how I am going to address, fix, make you feel all warm and fuzzy about my project, and fix your problem. And that's it. Just wanted to add that.
That's awesome. Thank you, Kimberly. I appreciate that. So next slide. So this slide's about what Kimberly was saying about stories. You want to tell people what's been done, especially as you start to garner wins and achievements. Because internal stories where people can see a story that's actually happening within the organization is more valuable than anything, because that really, I believe, is one of the tipping points, is when they see it in their own organization, you really get much closer to getting their buy-in, even for the skeptics. So you want to tell them, hey, we set so-and-so up with this electronic form to replace this paper process, or we digitized all this massive paper backlog and now it's full text searchable. We have a workflow that, sends notifications for expired insurance certificates, all this type of stuff. You want to communicate all those stories, because that demonstrates competence, and it also starts to win the skeptics over, and you get that tipping point, you get the critical mass. Okay, next slide. So let's talk about implicit communication. Explicit is when you're, things you're actually saying. Implicit is more your action and demonstration. That's like backing up what you're saying. You're backing up what you're saying with action. And what I found is there's a few things that implicitly you can do to really give yourself legitimacy and garner support with what you're trying to do. Research as a service, especially when you're new, you're still learning the holdings and you're trying to demonstrate competence, or you're just in the nascent portion of your program. Doing research as a service to people and finding informational solutions for them where they're used to having to go through really arduous processes, long-term, or never really finding what they need, and you're giving them what they need quickly and completely, is a huge implicit way of demonstrating that confidence and communicating to them, hey, we're your solution and we're competent and we're capable of doing this for you. Also, like legacy records transfers, where multiple file cabinets of stuff that they have to keep and they wish they could access certain parts of it, and it's really hard, it's really wonky. By digitizing all of that, making it searchable, making it more accessible with the right metadata, doing projects like that for people can also, by the sheer amount of information that you're taking from the analog paper stuck in a file cabinet that's hardly accessible to full text searchable online and dispersible to everybody. Another huge thing that I'm going to harp on is being prepared. Pre-building, identifying, I'll talk about this a little more later, but identifying where the pain points are, and then preparing for them coming to ask for a solution. It may be tomorrow, it may be 3 years from now, but being prepared, knowing that they're going to come ask you for a solution at some point. And then another two really important implicit ways of communicating are listening. By listening, you are telling people that you care and that you're incorporating their feedback. And that's that feedback mechanism that you're giving them. And by showing them that that is available and it actually works is hugely legitimizing in what you're trying to do. And then lastly, you have to have patience, and I'll touch upon this a little more later. You have to have patience and emotional intelligence. In general, what that shows is that you're measured, that you're attentive, that you're available, and that you can be the calm driving force in this process. So that's a huge one. That's something that you learn, or at least I have, but it's a really critical one. All right, next. So we talked about kind of what you want to communicate explicitly and implicitly. Now let's talk about how. I think it's very, very, very important that you communicate with clarity, brevity, the appropriate frequency, and timing. My motto is give them everything they need to hear and nothing they don't. Always be positive. That's the yes and that Kimberly's talking about, or I like to say we can. Either way, whatever expression it is, you have to be positive. Don't talk to hear yourself talk. I was guilty of this, especially early on when you start learning stuff and you think you're really competent. It's part of that, I forget what it's called, the idiot curve or something like that, where you want to hear yourself talk because you want to make sure that everybody hears how you understand something. Don't do that. Don't waste people's time. Tell them what they need to hear and nothing they don't, and be effective. The other thing that you have to do, and this is alluding to the previous slide, you have to really be keen to recognize when opportunities arise, communicate and execute. I like the Coast Guard motto, Semper Paratus, always ready. And that's where I was saying before, identify the informational pain points and the process pain points and come up with solutions for them with the tools you have. Hey, a workflow would address this, a form would address this. And they may want to see it tomorrow. They may not ask for that 5 years from now, but you're going to have it ready. And by having it ready, you are quickly and efficiently responding, communicating with them that, hey, I'm already on top of this and I have a solution ready for you. And then, you always have to, depending upon the context and what level of communication, you always have to know what mediums are most appropriate and where and when they're best applied, and we'll talk about all those mediums coming up. But that's where, you have to know the personas you're dealing with, and you have to know that you have to have situational awareness to know, hey, what's appropriate here for the person I'm dealing with, for the project, for the context, so on and so forth. All right, next slide. Okay, so this is about, you've got all these great plans and you've got, I've got my how and my what ready, but even if your what and your how is great, not everybody's ready for it when you're ready. That was a big learning curve for me. Just because it's a solution doesn't mean everybody's ready for it. So you have to be ready to pivot or adjust or pause. Your compliance task and digital transformation is not everybody's first interest or their primary responsibility. They have their own primary jobs on which they're evaluated and get their pay raises. So you have to respect that and respect their time and their responsibilities. So you have to really always keep an eye out when the windows of opportunity are there to appropriately communicate and when you'd be most effective. And then you have to be ready to act on it. You have to have your ducks in a row and have your stuff prepared. Like I said before, you have to focus on informational and process pain points and come up with pre-built solutions for them that maybe don't have to be complete, but they have to be, you can instantly show somebody, hey, I've identified that this is a process that could use automation or a form, and this is the solution, so you can show it to them when they're ready. And then, of course, communicating your accomplishments and your solutions. You want to keep promoting those stories because that reinforces, that gets you the momentum to where you hit the tipping point. All right, next. So this is like the Venn diagram that Kimberly was alluding to. Change management, I think, is it's pervasive everywhere, but it's especially part of the coincides with the project management component. And for me, visually, it helps to put them side by side and see what in the change management communication stages aligns with the project stages. And it makes a lot of sense to me just to look at it that way. Okay, next. All right, let's talk about what I like to call the communication toolbox. Whether you're communicating on a program level or you're communicating within a specific project, they may be slightly different, but you're always consistent in your messaging as to what the role of records is and what the goals of either a project or your overall program is. They're very much aligned, and so you have to communicate that way, even if you have to change your media, the specificity of your language, or so forth. So you have to know what the status of your program is and what the context is. Are you talking about a project, or are you doing an annual staff training? So, annual staff training, a new process to staff, building out a workflow among several departments or reporting staff, all going to use different language, different mediums, but they're all going to be consistent in their message, just a different expression of what records management does and what they're trying to do and what they have done. All right, so let's talk about mediums of communication. Again, the Venn diagram. So email, written, formal. I'm an email fan. I'm a bit of an introvert, so I really value email. And I would tell you that it's really great for certain formal roles, like when you're noticing something or setting up an introduction or introducing a process or trying to manage expectations with a certain stage of a project. I can't overstate how important it is that you write really well and that you don't have errors, because people notice that, and it really looks unprofessional when you don't do your editing and you have sloppy stuff. And I got a great suggestion from Kimberly that Grammarly is a fantastic tool to use to help you clean up your stuff with that. Like, let's say you're not the best writer or you don't have the time. Something like Grammarly can be a really great tool to expedite and really clean up your stuff. I could have used it. But email, written, formal, it's really important. Email, written, informal is also really important, but it's a completely different thing. There you don't have to worry about quite as much grammar. You're using that as a check-in or a follow-up, because then you can send it to somebody, they can read it on their time. You don't have to corner them when they're not ready or they're in the middle of something. That's the convenience of an informal email. And then, of course, you can't overstate in-person, oral, informal interaction. These are the check-ins and follow-ups when you're going through a project, and sometimes it's best to have just a little bit of FaceTime to show people, hey, it was worth me getting up, or as Kimberly's alluded to before, like management by walking around, where you want to check in with them, and by having some FaceTime with them, you show that you're invested and you really want their feedback more than just an email, that you'd like to hear what they have to say. Side note to this, I have found some of my best tidbits of information or some of my best insights from a quick, casual drop-by that was just to reinforce or check in or make sure everybody's doing okay, to reduce the anxiety, make people comfortable. And then I get some fantastic insights off the cuff. And then sometimes, you're crafting in a response email and you're 5 paragraphs in and it's 20 minutes. You're like, this is so much more easily taken care of with a 3 to 5 minute phone call. Sometimes a phone call is the best way to go. So just be aware of that. Again, we're a special district. We're still catching up to technology, so we don't really use Teams or Slack right now, but I'm sure that there's a lot of parallels between the mediums I stated and how you would interact on Teams, and that they may have different roles. Slack seems much more informal. Teams seems like it could have a formal component and an informal component. All right, next slide. So let's talk about communications just at the program level real quick. The reason I want to harp on this is because training is one of the most important mediums of communication for your program, especially if you have an early program and you're still trying to build your wins, because I've never been in a situation where I couldn't get my supervisor and other managers to agree to have their staff go to records management training. And so there you've had the approval to get captive attention of staff to train them on records or what processes you're trying to institute. That is gold. Do not waste that. So how do you not waste that? You make it short and sweet and action-packed and give them everything they need and nothing they don't. So we do a half-hour power training session for all staff. We keep it really efficient, well-paced, focused. You give them everything they need to know, nothing less. You demonstrate things that are possible. This is a great opportunity to show like, hey, you know, there's a form that does this, or we're working towards this workflow that achieves this. It's a way to slip in all these little demonstrations of what's possible within the records management training. And it also, I think, gets people thinking, and it takes it out from just hammering over the head of what their compliance responsibilities are. So I found success with that. And then you have to prepare and rehearse, because then you have things that are well-paced, you don't have dead time, and you're not monotone or you're going too slow. All those things are really, really imperative. And what you're doing through this expert and efficient training is you're demonstrating that you're competent and that people are looking to records as an informational solution. And then just quick note on like surveys, that's a great way to garner information too and to communicate with people. SurveyMonkey works. I've had astounding success with the voting function in Outlook. I think I've had an 85% response rate. And so if you need to just get a few tidbits of information, using that voting function in Outlook was a little piece of gold for me. All right,
If I may
talk about,
add, ooh,
yeah.
if I may add, tap your resources. So when you're building out a new deployment of a new technology, while you want to be perceived as having expertise, you cannot possibly be the expert in everything, because you're your expert in your field, not necessarily in this technology. But who is an expert is CPS. So tap that resource, ask Terrence or Joe to do a demo for you. Maybe go on the website and look for videos, or go to Laserfiche itself. They do webinars and point people in that direction too. There are many, many resources available. Please use them.
Thank you very much for saying that, Kimberly, because and I'm sorry I failed to not emphasize that enough, but leveraging your VAR, you're paying for that support, and like especially with like CPS, they're a fantastic VAR. Leverage that. I mean, we get so much support from them, and it's so invaluable, not just in communicating things to staff, but on the technical side too, the whole thing. And so it's a great resource. All those other resources as well, I completely agree, but especially your VAR. I think that for a lot of organizations that have Laserfiche, they really don't leverage and take full advantage of all the things their VAR can offer them. All right, so let's talk about project-specific communication, and that's almost all change management communication, in my opinion. This is knowing your audience, or as Kimberly would say, have your personas built out, have a grasp on who you're dealing with. You really want to have your horizontal communication dialed in, that you're talking at their level and using their language and their nomenclature when accurate and appropriate. And then you want to communicate vertically to the stakeholders, initially for buy-in and support, and later as reporting. And then you're going to have to adjust and be flexible. There's these different personas, different learning types, different departmental needs, and different contexts in which these things are happening.
Yeah, I'd like to add, don't be afraid of not knowing the answer to something. I think that's frequently a fear that project managers might have, because it's your project and of course you should know everything, but that's not necessarily the case. But if you're able to go and do the research, or go to your reseller or to Laserfiche or what have you, and get the information and come back, you don't lose any standing in the eyes of your project partner. In fact, I think it makes you look better, because you're willing to go and do the work to make sure they get the answer that they need.
Very well said, Kimberly. I completely 100% agree. You cannot have to say, it's almost like a yes and saying, hey, I'm aware of this, but I don't know the full answer. Let me look into it and get back to you. I had to do that yesterday. So, and as long as you are responsive and efficient, you don't take a long time to get back to them, and you do your proper research and you have a proper answer, like Kimberly said, that will be even more legitimizing. So because one, you're willing to admit that you don't know, but then you do find the answer quickly and efficiently. And so they get to see you in action, find a solution. And so that's another way to demonstrate competence. So very well said, Kimberly. All right, so we're getting near the end here. So I also think I wanted to say something real quick about, I think as records managers that you have to honestly assess the state of your program, because I think that will better inform and guide how you communicate with staff. And I'll give a couple examples. Like if you're in a starting from scratch or a very young program, the kind of explicit communication you want to do is a lot of these yes ands and we can'ts. Oftentimes bringing outside consultant to orientate people to what records management is about can be legitimizing as well. Sometimes they'll listen to an outside consultant more than they'll listen to you. Way to start to build awareness. Don't undervalue that. You can't use it all the time, but especially in a young program, it can be valuable. And then taking advantage of that training. You can always argue for some training, but then you have to maximize that opportunity, and you have to slip into that training, quote unquote training. You slip in the we can do this and what's possible. And then, like I said, research as a service for the implicit stuff. You provide those solutions. Do the grunt work. It's like sometimes things will be in Laserfiche and then they won't be in Laserfiche because you're ingesting a bunch of new stuff into Laserfiche, but you're providing an information solution to them and you're driving them back amicably and repeatedly into the system and training them that Laserfiche is their centralized information solution, and just keep demonstrating competence.
I was interviewing a client for a case study the other day, and she told me one of the most powerful things that she was able to do for her potential Laserfiche customers in her organization was just demonstrate searches. Like literally sit at their desk, open it up, and do a search, which, is kind of like Google, really. And she said that really blew people away.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. And then showing them the value of context hits and how to access those as an extension. That's an extension to that value. So yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I've used that as well, especially the context hit stuff, because they don't usually see that as much or interact with that quite as much. And so that's really helpful. All right, so then I want to talk about, like, let's say you have a developing program. You've had some wins, but you still have a lot of building to do. I think most programs are kind of in this large middle swath. In your explicit communications, you still want to communicate all these we cans, but then you also want to leverage your stories. We did this for so-and-so. We did that. You want to keep promoting RIM and Laserfiche as your foundational information hub, but you want to start expanding outside just the clerk admin sphere into other departments. You want to find those mavens and connectors, as Kimberly said, and you want to start building the relationships with those people, those high-value people who can really help you and that you can partner with. And then, as I said before, this is really important. Identify the informational and process pain points and pre-build solutions for them using your Laserfiche tools. Does it have to be completely functional and fleshed out? No, but it has to be where you can, like, export a process diagram and show them all the steps and that it can be automated, and have those answers ready for them. Like I said, they could ask you tomorrow, they could ask you 5 years from now, but when they ask you, if you have it all ready and you can show them something, that's going to get you a long way towards getting them on board to looking to you as a solution and to implementing that solution. And then just real quickly about mature programs. I've worked in a mature program before, and mature programs can have some very long established processes and some successes in certain channels, but then they can have like structural and communicative gaps that have gone on for a long time due to whatever politics and historical baggage. And that's where I think in a mature program, change management and the skill of change management communication is even more important, and your level of expertise in communicating change management is even more critical here, because instead of building something from scratch where there are few, if any, preconceived prejudices or notions as to how things are, breaking down long-standing walls, and that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. So this is where change management has to be like on steroids. So even mature programs need change management communication. I'd say even more so than others in certain ways. All right, we're going to go our first case study. First case study, 2 parts. Part 1, the origin, shock, a reaction to an adverse event. I can't believe it. Who is the initiator? The board of directors in this case. What was the problem? There was a long-standing annual contract with another public agency, more than 15 years, and we were supposed to apply annually for a reimbursement as part of this contractual program, and that tracking of that contract was not, that agreement was not being done. So they missed all this money over years and years and years that they could have been reimbursed on. And it's because they were lacking consistent centralized management of contracts. So we here via the board, via the GM and assistant manager from the board, they're requesting a review of all contracts and day forward tracking and notification to avoid this problem in the future. The AGM said, hey, yeah, after you get all these processed and you know what all the actionable dates are, I want a tickler so I know when these things are coming up. So his language is tickler. Okay, I have to translate that into records management Laserfiche and say, oh, that means we have to add metadata to our contracts and have a workflow that picks that up, that notifies him effectively when certain actionable events come up. So then we had to plan it, this was mostly an administration records management thing where we had to figure out, we had a bunch of contracts in Laserfiche, but we also had a bunch of contracts not in Laserfiche. So we had to review everything in Laserfiche first for actionable events, and then we had to, we had to do that, but we also had to get all this stuff into Laserfiche and also add metadata there. So we had to plan out, like, how does that work and how do we track all that? And it was a behemoth process, I will tell you. And then once you get that process of ingestion and adding the right metadata, then you have to communicate with your VAR. Like, I had little to no, I had some forms experience and no workflow experience. So I had to go to our VAR, CPS, specifically Terrence Stray, who is the man. And we had to identify what are the, we're using workflow. Should we use forms of workflow? We're using workflow, what components? And because I had a conceptual understanding of workflow and could have fumbled around with some things, there's no way I could have built this first form without Terrence. He largely built that first form for us and walked me through it. And the education I received on that was absolutely invaluable and has spurned on numerous forms since then, just based upon the knowledge gained in that. So that was our execution. We got all these contracts into Laserfiche. We reviewed pre-existing contracts and added proper metadata. All the ones that were being ingested were reviewed and all the metadata was added. Then we had to build and test the workflow. And we tested that a few times. You had to communicate the, the testing process to the parties, because we were able to use a limited testing pool, so we were able to test mostly internally, so it was much more efficient, not as much change management language needed for part one, but I'll show you in part two there was. And then you communicate that success to the executive tier. Part two is also a reaction to adverse events, shock. In this case, the new engineering manager, who had previous experience with document control, observed the benefit of contact tracking and our solution to part one problem, right? What their problem was is they had decentralized, unautomated engineering document management, resulting in missed expiration rules of core active documents. So water and sewer application permits, will serve letters, insurance certificates, task orders, so forth. So what we started off with is a discussion with the manager. She brought it up. Oh, can we have some sort of process that picks up these notifications so we don't miss these expirations and these renewals? So then you had to go to the engineering staff and you had to find out what all the document types are and what all the different processes are for executing these and where are they stored. And then you had to map out that process and come up with an automated solution. So our solution starts with DocuSign to actually execute the document. And then once it's executed, it goes into Laserfiche with the proper metadata. And then a workflow crawls certain metadata fields and notifies the proper project management staff, when certain things are expiring, and drives them back into the system with a link to the actual document and what is the actionable event. So, we had to build all that. And then because it involved the whole department, this is where change management communication was really important, because we had to communicate about the upcoming testing, what it would entail, what everybody's roles were, and that we needed feedback. And then you run a test. And I can't tell you how important it is when you run a test to gather as much feedback as possible and incorporate as much of that feedback as possible. The better you are at gathering and implementing feedback on a testing cycle, the fewer iterations you have, and then you avoid testing fatigue and you can go live sooner. So because there were multiple forms, it took a little testing on some, but largely within about 2 testing cycles, we were ready to go live. So just to summarize, what we ended up with was we enhanced template fields and metadata fields for the records at issue, starting with contracts, but also core active engineering documents. The core fields were the notification event date and then the notification reason. We built a workflow that runs daily that identifies these event dates and emails the associated project manager with customized direct messaging and a link back to the record. Thank you, Terrence Spray, for all your help on that. So that is a successfully functioning processes within our engineering department and district-wide. And it's so wonderful to get those automated notifications and just see that working and that everything's clear, and it's very helpful to everybody. One additional thing about the auditing and monitoring portion is that when you go live, especially in the beginning, but always, but especially in the beginning, you want to monitor that closely, because you could still get hung, the process could still get hung up on an error or something inconsistently or improperly entered and so forth. You want to make sure that the second that there's an error, you want to communicate through action that you're on top of it, that you're aware of it, and what the status is and when it's completed. And then, of course, and Kimberly has alluded to this, you want to explicitly communicate your success and thank yous, where you give more credit to your partners than yourself, and you make sure that they get a ton of credit, and you espouse how successful this partnership was. And this is kind of the impetus of me being invited to this webinar. Is after this process, if we could go to the next slide, I gathered all these stats to communicate to the executive tier, and then I thought, well, why don't we, there's some skeptics around in the organization that I'm trying to win over, so why don't we communicate this to all staff? So I partnered with the public affairs staff and gave them all this information, and they wonderfully crafted it into a visually pleasing, professionally arranged one sheet in our quarterly newsletter, in which we can outline all the aspects of the program, call out stats, and then most importantly at the bottom, give a big shout out to your partners. And this demonstrates to everybody, hey, there's success going on with these types of automation, digital transformation projects within the district. It's extremely valuable. And you're passively communicating with your skeptics saying, hey, look, see what we did and we're succeeding at this. That one of these may not take care of it, but you're slowly building that momentum to win them over, to get to that tipping point with them.
And there's something to be said for like, this could be you, like, which is also kind of implied with all the shout outs and the positive statistics.
Yes, it's definitely implied. Absolutely. That's the whole purpose of it. Completely agreed. All right, next case study. This one is happening right now in real time. So what's the origin of this? Financial auditors were calling out the inconsistent or insufficient documentation for separating employees to the accounting supervisor. Separating employee process was often incomplete, lacking interdepartmental supervisorial visibility, resulting in lost assets, security issues, unresolved problems. The key card didn't get turned in, the cell phone, what happened with their passwords, did they get all their payroll information, how are we going to issue their last check, who does it get in? And not all these things were being missed, but they were being missed here and there or not being consistently done, because the process involved 4 different departments, multiple checklists, and a to-be-determined supervisor depending upon what employee was separating. So the initiator was, via the auditor, was the accounting supervisor from auditor input. So how did this work? I initially thought I was going to have a meeting with just the accounting supervisor. She set up a meeting. I walk in, and there's the accounting supervisor, the HR department, the IT department, and administration representatives. And I'm like, okay, this can be this type of meeting. Let's get into it. So we had to identify and map out the process. What are the key needs and results? And we whiteboarded this thing. And it was very revealing to see how little awareness different departments had as to what other departments' role was in the overall process. So it was very educational, eye-opening, sometimes a little uncomfortable, but we kept it positive and we kept moving through trying to focus on the solution and identify those gaps. And at the end of it, we had a fleshed out process on the whiteboard that was something that we could start with. So then executing, I took from that meeting and I built out a workflow for this form. And it wasn't functional yet, but what I had is I had a visual representation of all the process steps. I printed that out and I sent it out to all the stakeholders and I said, please mark this up and tell me what's right or what needs to be moved. And everybody came back to me very quickly, and I took all that feedback. So in that case, the feedback mechanism was a printed piece of paper. I found that was best because then they can just write it, they can mark it up and just give it to me. Picture tells 1,000 words. So once we got that feedback, I integrated all that and we were ready to test. Again, you have to communicate what the testing process is, what to expect, what's going to be going on. And then I had to monitor because there were multiple steps. Regularly send out status reports. Okay, we're at this stage. This person still needs to do this, but to just try and keep the form moving to successful test completion, because then we can identify all the things that need to be fixed afterwards. So once we got through one iteration successfully, I took all that feedback on oh, what's the proper wording for this notification? This field isn't behaving properly. I can't do this. I can't assign this task. Take all that information, incorporate it in, and then run another test. And by doing really good feedback and really good incorporation of feedback, within 2 test cycles, we were ready to go live. And we went live last week. We're still in the midst of completing this process. The person just separated on Thursday, so we've done all the pre-stuff, and we're moving to the post stuff, and there's still a lot of auditing and monitoring to make sure that the process moves to completion successfully. So what is the basic solution here for this case study? We came up with an interdepartmental Laserfiche form that gathers, formalizes, and automates every step of the separation process, working through departments in parallel. That's important because that way one department isn't dependent upon another to complete their task. And then with all components being compiled and delivered to HR and accounting when the process is complete. Yes, you still have to regularly audit and monitor. Certain people are lagging on picking up their step of the process. So you give them some time, but then you have to follow up with them, positively, hey, and usually a drop by, a FaceTime check-in says that gives an extra emphasis. Hey, let's keep this moving. So we're still in the midst of that, and then, maintain those stats and report up to the vertical tiers to what's going on. And the last thing I have is just kind of a graphic of the process. So up top is just like kind of the early stages of the process, but just to show the parallel actions. And then down below it's hard to read, but that's our whole process for the separating employee form. And we built that all out in-house based upon all the knowledge that I've gained from Terrence and all the knowledge and experience I've gained building my own forms. And so are there way more complex forms to do? Yes. Is this one of the more complex forms we've implemented here thus far? Yes. So I'm pretty proud of it. It's only as good as the people who use it, but at least you can demonstrate that all this is possible and it can be automated. And the initiator, the accounting supervisor, is extremely I consider that a success, even though some things remain to be seen, whether we have to continue to reinforce or tweak or continue to audit and monitor. So that's about all I have. I appreciate your time, and I hope that some of this was valuable. Anything you want to add, Kimberly?
No, that was excellent, Tony. Thank you very much. We appreciate your help with this. So since we're on a video, obviously we can't answer questions and answers, but we do have a place where you can direct your questions. And that's with Jamie Dunn, who is our VP of Sales, and his email and phone number are up in front of you. If you have any questions regarding this video, please contact him and he will be happy to answer them. So thank you to our audience. And again, thank you, Tony. We appreciate you being here, and we will see you all at the next webinar.